Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining my session today. My name is Anna Sarnik, and I am the head of risk solutions at SecurityScorecard. I also handle our strategic partners like Microsoft, AWS, among others. And I'm really excited to talk to you about how to get your first few transactions on Marketplace. But even more so beyond, I also want to talk about what to do once you've secured those couple of first transactions. So it's probably been talked about ad nauseum already during the sessions, but I do want to start by covering why customers like to procure through Marketplace, and then go into a little bit of how to prospect Marketplace deals and co-sell together with cloud partners for growth. So just to start, why do customers like cloud marketplaces? I'm sure that this already rings a bell if you have looked into marketplaces a little bit. But first and foremost, it's flexible payments, right? And I like to think of flexible payments as meeting the customers where they are and also being able to test new models for your business. When we think about pricing and packaging, a lot of the times there's a lot of marketing work that goes into it, and it's really hard to fast fail. So, flexible payment is both an opportunity for customers to ask for what they need, make sure that they're being able to do incremental billing on their monthly cloud bills, being billed for usage of your product. But it's also a great space for you as a company to test out the way and collect new inputs from customers of what kind of pricing and packaging or payments options that they're looking for. Deployment speed, that's key, right? One of our fastest deals that I'll talk about later on, it was closed within 6 days. The customer was able to be onboarded on our platform the same day that they closed their deal. So they really like the way that they're able to deploy the solution quickly and start using it in the environment. And the biggest incentive, I think, especially in the current economic environment, is consolidated billing and the benefits that come from it. Not just reducing internal overhead, but overall the benefits that customers get from consolidating all of the procurement on a single bill with the cloud provider. So I want to go through a quick example that we have from my company. This was actually our first and also one of the largest marketplace transactions that we've done to this day. And it was a total contract value of $660,000 with a CISO of a major multi marketing company in this space. And it was a renewal and an upsell. So this specific customer used to be a 1 year contract customer. And what we've done here is not only did we secure an upsell, but we also expanded the contract from 1 year to a multi-year contract. And this was all because we were able to allocate it against the customer's AWS marketplace spend in this specific example. And what happened was that this was right after coming out of COVID, when the financial environment started looking a little bit iffy, a little bit questionable. So this CISO specifically, she had a renewal coming up in the spring and she was taking a look at her budget. She also knew that she had a large spend commitment with AWS. So we were in the final negotiation stages and she approached us and she said, hey, you know what? Is there any way that we can transact this through Marketplace so that I can secure and make sure that we have your solution for full 3 years? I don't want to risk the budgets being cut. So this is where, her pain points were potential budget constraints, potential need for cost reduction down the road, and also an enterprise expansion because she was expanding the license usage with us. So this is where we were able to quickly pivot and go on AWS Marketplace, and it was a great win for both of us. So what's important to know when you're thinking about securing your first marketplace deals is really understanding your customer, understanding their procurement landscape. So for a company like SecurityScorecard, we, for example, don't talk to the end user buyer in the procurement space that manages the cloud contracts for us, right? So we know notionally that customers often sign contracts with infrastructure providers for economies of scale. We also know that cloud contracts come with an annual spend and commitments that usually are use or lose. And the customers are pressured to make sure that they're not leaving the money on the table, especially when it comes to towards the end of those annual spend timeframes. And the fact that marketplace SaaS purchases can be applied to cloud commitments to maximize the value. So, really, the bottom line here is that it all comes down to the customer's procurement preferences and understanding what the benefits are for the customers and being able to navigate the conversation correctly. So, how do we find out if a customer has a preference of procuring through marketplaces? It really starts with understanding their relationship with the cloud provider. Do they have one? Is the buyer that you are talking to the buyer who is familiar with the cloud provider relationship within their enterprise? If not, can you find a way to educate the buyer to make sure that they are asking the correct questions internally? And this is where it's really important to educate them on the benefits to see whether they might want to take a route through marketplace based on the financial incentives they have and the speed and efficiency that they can get. Whether the procurement team of that customer would want to prefer or prefer to go through AWS Marketplace or Azure GCP marketplaces. I have had several conversations helping account teams this year specifically where we're hearing from the buyers that the procurement teams are really pushing to consolidate all of the spending through cloud marketplace contract vehicles. So in this case, it's really helpful to ask the customer whether they've spoken to the procurement team and see whether they might want to internally do some checking to see whether marketplace might be the internally preferred route that they just haven't been aware of. And the best one is understanding whether there is a committed spend that the customer has. Are there leftover spends on the contract that they might need to draw down on, where you can help them out by allocating your software spend against their existing cloud commitments? And then finally, the consolidation of the bill. So, bottom line that I want to communicate here is that at the end of the day, it all comes down to the relationships. It comes down to the relationship with the customer, understanding the customer's preference. But even more so, really, marketplace is just like any other partnership or just like any other channel. In the questions that we just covered about understanding the customer's preferences in marketplace, it is a lot easier if you have a partner by your side, someone who can give you tips and tricks ahead of time to navigate that conversation. So, messaging and alignment and commitment to the partnership that you're establishing when you go into marketplaces is really key because imagine a scenario where you are in a smaller business, it's your first transaction, and you're going in a little bit blind. And especially if your customer is not in a CTO or a CISO position where they're a little bit removed, maybe they're in an HR department, or maybe they are in a data science or an overall business operation department, and they have absolutely no idea what the cloud procurement process looks like. Wouldn't it be nice if you were able to quickly tap your Microsoft, Google, or AWS buddy on the shoulder and say, hey, I have this opportunity. I did some research online and it looks like they might be your customer. Can you give me a little bit of an insight so that you are leading the customer a little bit in that conversation rather than coming in with the questions? And you're providing some guidance and tips on who to talk to. If they're not familiar about cloud relationships, telling them that maybe their CTO office is the one that has the right answers. If they're not familiar with the procurement preferences or how marketplace procurement process goes, maybe recommending to them that they reach out to the procurement department. So what I really want everyone to walk away from my session is at the end of the day, relationship is key. Because if a customer is already familiar with marketplaces, they will quickly respond to your questions when you're asking about cloud relationships, when you're asking them whether they've transacted through marketplace. So it's more about how to navigate waters in new spaces and making sure that it feels smooth. It feels like something that you've done before and you're meeting the customer where they are in that process. And sometimes it takes a little bit of a give and take to make sure that the customer understands the value in bringing in this channel to their ecosystem so that they're more amenable of working through the cloud marketplaces with you. And I want to cover a little bit about why sales teams buy into this, because there's always a friction when we go from the business unit and recommend that our functions try something new, something unknown, something different, right? So, similar to what we covered from the customer's perspective of why they benefit from it, from the sales reps perspective, once they start engaging in these marketplace deal cycles and they see that there's so much removal of PO paperwork going away, the fact that there doesn't need to be a new vendor onboarding paperwork that they need to work internally with finance and legal department to complete. Sometimes, even if it's a smaller customer or even large enterprises who are open to using standard contracts that you have publicly published or the ones that AWS Marketplace has, it's really possible to cut out so many steps in a process that the deal cycle speed is something that sales reps really celebrate. Collaboration, another one. The cloud infrastructure provider teams usually are very responsive and they hold relationships at the top of the organization. So they're always able to provide you a bigger picture of what's happening. If a CISO stops responding to you and says that they're going through an audit, maybe that cloud infrastructure provider team will be able to provide you with a little bit of a higher business context and some timelines where they can recommend when you can follow up with the customer and close the deal. And then higher total contract value. It is always, well, not always, it is easier to upsell and do expansions through cloud contracts, primarily because if you know that customers have committed spend for multiple years, navigating that conversation of allocating the funding within that cloud contract for the duration of their commitment with a cloud infrastructure provider is going to be a lot more simple than trying to convince them to take a bet on you for multiple years when they don't know what their budget landscape might look like next year or especially in 2 years. So there's a lot more security in navigating that conversation as well. And I pulled some of the quotes from my own internal sales teams. This is something that I used as part of our SKO kickoff this year, just to give you an idea of why they really like working with the marketplace teams. In our instance, we work very closely with AWS today as we look at expanding to additional marketplaces. So, reps and CAMs, channel account managers, willing to help us in many ways that we can. Working with AWS reps to get higher in the account because they were not talking to the decision makers. So they worked with the counterparts to make sure that they're speaking to the budget holder and the decision maker directly. And especially the outstanding vehicle to accelerate sales cycle, right? Like what we just talked about. Vendor onboarding paperwork is not required, consolidated invoicings, the PO is not needed. The digital acceptance of offers is everything that our reps at SecurityScorecard are really celebrating and excited about. So I wanted to bring forward some metrics. We've been accelerating through Marketplace. We just closed our third quarter of acceleration. So these metrics are continuing to improve and grow, and I wanted to share some of them with you. For deal cycles, I mentioned this before, we have a deal that was closed within 6 days. From Genesis to close, the customer was on Marketplace. We didn't have to do any contract redlining, and everything was processed in less than a week. Our average deal cycle for enterprise accounts is about 32 days, which I think is also pretty impressive because our regular deal cycles are about the 3 times of that. The growth metric is the one that I'm the most proud of. I'm very impressed by our teams. We grew 8x in a marketplace ARR transactions in just 2 quarters last year. So we went from doing barely any business with the marketplace providers to closing out 1% of our total ARR in just 2 quarters last year. Co-sell, I have about 87 response rate from our cloud infrastructure partners, where our sales teams are seeing a really strong teamwork together. And then lead generation. Similar to any other channel partners, the more you work together, the more that your counterpart understands how you fit into the enterprise ecosystem, the more they can pinpoint an opportunity to bring you in and jointly solve customer problems. So in the third quarter of this acceleration, I have more metrics now. We've gotten more new referrals, but we're finally at the stage where we're starting to see a lot of new referrals trickle in. So, in case it's not obvious, I'm a very big cloud marketplace transaction supporters, and I hope that what I shared today is helpful to you. And we have a few minutes left for questions. Let me see. In the marketplace example you shared, the one with large TCV that started. Yeah, so the renewal example that I shared in the beginning, that was actually a partner deal. We hold the relationship, but we have one of the channel partners that was in the annual renewal. We did offer the same pricing because this was already in a stage of the customer asking for the final quote. All of the legal negotiations were already handled. And literally, our account team was getting stressed out to see if they'll meet their quarter metrics. And a customer asked if we can flip it through Marketplace, and we flipped it. So within the 2 days from them making that request, we transferred it through Marketplace to Optiv. They transferred it to the customer, and it was accepted. So yes, same pricing. We made a conscious decision internally for sales to make sure that Marketplace is channel neutral. One of the things that I noticed when I initially joined SecurityScorecard is we were penalizing our sellers with the Marketplace fees on top of our channel partner margins. So one thing that I negotiated with our finance team and the sales leadership is to make an investment to grow Marketplace. So the fees that you would see, 3% for renewal, 8%, it's different depending on where you are, what marketplace, but we are taking that as an SG&A cost in the back end, and our sales reps are not being penalized for it, which is an important factor when you're considering pricing. All right, I don't think there are any more questions that I see right now. Okay. Well, if that's all, I'll also go hang out in the lounge after this session. If you want to come in and knowledge share a little bit more, ask me any additional questions that you may have.